I'm Bill Gates.
Nice. At the stroke of the midnight hour. Don't take it so hard, it's because I laugh.
Double 20.
We're building a new
Knowing the future.
startup teams from scratch.
Technology is, in a sense, the future of all industry.
The next Mark Zuckerberg won't start a social network.
The way to scale your ambition the furthest is to actually use the global reach of technology to have enormous impact very, very quickly.
Hello and welcome to Scaling Ambition. I'm your host, Nassos Papadopoulos, and today's conversation is another special one focusing on another of Entrepreneur First's new locations, Hong Kong. In it, EF co-founder and CEO Matt Clifford interviews EF Hong Kong General Manager Lavina Tien, exploring her background and the Hong Kong startup ecosystem. EF thrives in cities that are magnets for ambitious people around the world, and Hong Kong is one of the places at the top of that list. The city is full of exceptional individuals thanks to its leading universities, growing venture ecosystem, and unmatched business environment. In March 2018, the opening of the office in Hong Kong was first announced, and the very first cohort started in July 2018. Just 6 months later, in January 2019, 7 companies emerged from Hong Kong 1 to pitch at EF's Asia 4 demo day with a bunch of companies from Singapore. From underwater drones for ships to automating endoscopy and revolutionary data converter chips to predictive analytics for buildings, the first Hong Kong cohort was an exciting sign of things to come. More on that in a minute. But first, if you'd like to check out more content from EF, then go to the homepage of our site, joinef.com, and click on the content tab to access more articles, podcasts, and videos with practical startup advice from EF cohort members and global thought leaders like LinkedIn co-founder Reid Hoffman and A16Z partner Frank Chen. To apply to one of our next cohorts, simply click on the Apply Now button to join one of the next programs in London, Berlin, or Paris in Europe, or Singapore, Hong Kong, or Bangalore in Asia. Now, back to business and the subject of today's interview. Lavina is an entrepreneur with an extraordinary CV. She had stints at Airbnb, Google, and McKinsey, among others. She's also had over 8 years' experience in the startup space, specializing in growth and operations, and even helped launch Asian operations for 3 global tech companies, making her a perfect fit for EF Hong Kong. In this episode, Matt and Lavina discuss Lavina's background and why she was so excited by EF's mission, the Hong Kong startup ecosystem and the opportunities in the area, and EF's partnership with Hacks, the world's leading early-stage hardware investor. This was a great conversation with some awesome insight into Lavina's story and the Hong Kong ecosystem. So, without further ado, please enjoy this conversation between Matt Clifford and Lavina Tien.
I want to start by thinking back to, I guess, about a year ago now. So from an Entrepreneur First perspective, about a year ago, we just launched our first of the new wave of Entrepreneur First cities in Berlin. And we were starting to think about, kind of where next in Asia. And it became clear to us, and I'm sure this is something we'll talk about, that there was a huge opportunity in Hong Kong. But the key was finding the right general manager who could lead it and run with it and make it a huge success. And so we were super excited when we met you, and even more excited when you agreed to join us. So I thought maybe a good place to start would be, do you want to tell us a little bit about your story, kind of your career in the lead up to how that led to you getting the call from EF, and then we can dive in from there?
Sure. So just a quick background. I was born and raised in Hong Kong and did my education in the US. And I've always spent most of my life in the tech ecosystem, if you will. I started off my career at Google. I spent 4 years there, after which I went to business school, did a bit of consulting after that, did my own startup for a while, and then also went back to join Airbnb and another smaller startup called student.com. So I've always been in the operating end of tech companies, but not so much of the investment end, if you will. So I don't really know what it's like from the other side of the table, looking at startups and kind of figure out what makes them work, what makes them scale, and all of that. So when EF kind of knocked on my door, I thought it was a really good opportunity, a really interesting opportunity to also kind of revitalize the Hong Kong startup ecosystem. Because, being born and raised here, I've always wanted the Hong Kong tech ecosystem to kind of blossom and grow. But I think for the first part of the 2000s, we've often been eclipsed by, places like Singapore, obviously cities in China. And I really feel that there's a lot of talent in Hong Kong that is underutilized. And so I was really excited to take on this role at EF.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that I personally love about EF is, our business model is that of a VC fund, but the way we think and the way we act is like an operating company and, a kind of really like a startup in many ways. I mean, I guess these days, more of a scale up, there's 100 of us now around the world, but
exactly.
We kind of, I guess when we saw your background, we were like, well, actually, you've worked in these fast scaling global tech companies before. And actually the way we think about investing at EF, that it is actually all about the ability to identify, work with and enable talent. And it feels like that's something that Hong Kong has in spades. I mean, maybe we can talk a little bit about that. What are people right now in Hong Kong? What do the most ambitious people want to do with their lives? If you ignore for a minute startups, what are the mainstream career choices?
I think traditionally, the property sector has always given Hong Kong people the biggest ROI in terms of investment. So,
right.
Variety of different facets of the property, industry, like be it in like development or in hospitality and retail. I think we have, Hong Kong has some of the Asia's largest property development firms. So
right.
That's almost like a natural place for kind of people to gravitate towards. Finance is another big one, obviously. Hong Kong's been a pretty prominent financial hub for the past few decades. And so that's also a place that a lot of kind of university graduates would aspire to and what they consider would be a successful career.
Yeah, and in some ways it's very similar to London and, kind of the experience that Alice and I had when we started Entrepreneur First was, almost like thinking of the finance sector, but actually probably also real estate in London too, as this almost an enormous talent suction machine that was depriving London of some of its best founders. And I guess my mental model of Hong Kong is actually somewhat similar, that, when I look at the caliber of the people there, there's got to be some billion-dollar companies that never got built because people became bankers or real estate investors instead. But I do feel that's changing, or it's starting to change. Can you talk a little bit about the tech ecosystem? It's obviously still quite early, but what's already happening in Hong Kong, and is it changing?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think EF came to Hong Kong at absolutely the right time. If you think about 5 to 6 years ago when I was doing my startup, there was literally only one co-working space in the entire city that I could work out of. Yeah, no, I'm not kidding. And then fast forward 6 years, there's now been there's over 100 co-working spaces. Back then there were only kind of big family foundations, like Horizons, for example, or some of the government initiatives that funded these startups. And now there's a fresh new crop of kind of VC funds. There's kind of investment arms of Chinese companies that are now interested in Hong Kong startups. There are family offices, high net worth individuals. So I think from both a kind of infrastructure and capital standpoint, it's definitely grown a lot. We've also seen some pretty we've had our own unicorns as well coming out. GoGo Van was one of our first after it merged. Yeah. But there's also SenseTime, which is kind of Hong Kong's biggest secret unicorn that nobody's heard of, just because a lot of people identify as a mainland Chinese company. But SenseTime is basically the world's highest valued AI startup that's now worth over $5 billion. It was actually born out of a Chinese university Hong Kong professor and his doctoral research team. That's obviously now moved to Shenzhen, and that's where it's based. But if you think about SenseTime, if you think about DJI, the drone company, it also had its roots in Hong Kong UST.
I think that's such a good example as well, the SenseTime story, because, I think one of the things that we noticed in London was that the moment that the DeepMind story became public, and, they were really under the radar for quite a while, but, kind of a few years ago when Google acquired them, it became public. It sort of not only was, a sort of great moment for showing that deep tech is possible in London, which, there'd been a lot of skepticism about. But it also said to almost like every PhD student in computer science in the country, hey, you can do this too. And I kind of get the sense that SenseTime is having, or is about to have, that impact in Hong Kong. In that, if you're at HKUST, you start to say, well, maybe I can do that too. And I think that feeling is a very powerful one for stimulating entrepreneurship. Do you think that's right? Is that happening?
Absolutely. And I think that even when we interview Hong Kong people, for EF, a a lot of times we ask, what does success look like for you? Or who is your role model, right? They would cite companies like SenseTime because it was, if they can do it, why not? I mean, they came, a lot of the CUHK students, for example, would cite SenseTime because they came out straight out of the university lab, right? In some sense. So I think it's having that role model is a huge factor in influencing their decision to kind of do their own thing. And also in terms of what success looks like and what is possible for them coming out of Hong Kong.
Yeah, it's so funny. And I've got used to it now, but at first I found it quite discouraging. Every new location we've opened in, including London, back in 2011, the number one bit of feedback that we always got from the ecosystem was, there's no deep tech here. It was always, there's no deep tech here. And, people said that in London in 2011. They said it in Singapore in 2016. They said it about all 4 sites that we've gone to in 2018. And, I think one of the interesting things that is hard to observe from the outside is saying there's no deep tech here usually just means that the deep tech talent hasn't been activated. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Right. It just means that no one has said to these people, you don't have to go work in a research lab or even in like a quant fund. There is this other path. And for me, the most exciting moment to enter an ecosystem is actually when people are still saying there's no deep tech here, but actually you see the talent, actually pooling around these topics, whether it's machine learning or blockchain or something completely different. And I think that's what makes me incredibly bullish on Hong Kong is, the times that I've been out with you and the team and met people at the events that we run, the caliber of the people is super high and the ambition level is there. And I kind of feel the whole ecosystem is going through this moment where it just becomes more and more mainstream. And that's really exciting.
Exactly. I think the mindset is changing. I think if you were to speak to people 10 years ago, they'd be like, oh, startup is not a traditional career path for them.
Yeah.
And it's such a big kind of leap from what they were doing, and it's a big risk. But I think to them now, not to do a startup might be the bigger risk.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. That idea is so important. I remember, again, sort of like most of the places we've been, one of the things that we learned very quickly, and I think one of the keys to our success, is that when we tell people about Entrepreneur First, if they've not heard of it before, it does sound a bit weird. These people will pay me to start a company? Like, how does that work? And actually what we learned early on was it's not just them. It's not just the founder that you have to convince. It's their family, it's their friends, and it's really about the cultural conventions around career. There used to be a joke in London like, oh, entrepreneurship is just a euphemism for unemployment. And obviously we don't believe that, but what do you think like the culture, particularly in families and, kind of maybe more traditional society is around entrepreneurship? Is it yet acceptable? Is it changing? Is it still seen as a pretty weird out there thing to do by maybe the older generation?
No, I would say actually Hong Kong is a city that's built on a super robust entrepreneurial roots. I mean, if you look back at my own grandparents who were refugees from China and a lot of other people from Hong Kong, when they moved to Hong Kong from China in the 1940s and 50s, they had nothing but the entrepreneurial mindset.
Right.
The richest man in Asia, Li Ka-shing, he started off his career doing plastic flowers in a factory.
Right.
So I think the entrepreneurial mindset is actually there, has always been there. It's been the bedrock of Hong Kong. It just kind of got lost in the comfort of kind of the second and third generation. People in the 50s and 60s, they built up Hong Kong as a manufacturing and textiles giant. I mean, we were supplying denim jeans to the US for the longest time, lots of other things. And obviously with manufacturing, then came property. And then I think the property development and the boom in real estate did create some sense of complacency in a lot of people. They didn't have to really think too much out of the box to build their own business anymore because property had such great ROI. So I think through kind of the second, third, fourth generation, people kind of start going, maybe I can just kind of rest on my laurels a little bit. I don't really have to do what my forefathers did before. But no, I absolutely disagree. I think the older generation would say, absolutely building your own business, taking advantage of whatever opportunities out there for you is the way to go.
That's really exciting. I think that's that's an important part of the story in a way. Is you could say Hong Kong itself is an incredible startup success story.
Yeah, we went from a fishing village like 100 years ago, right, to what we are today.
Yeah, no, it's really extraordinary. I mean, I think one of the things that has been so exciting for me about the first year of EF in Hong Kong is actually not only are we finding great talent, and not only is the EF process working really well in Hong Kong, but we're also seeing some really exciting opportunities of the kinds of companies that are maybe we can help build in Hong Kong that maybe would be harder to build in London or Paris. And I'm thinking particularly about hardware. So, one thing that we've found is that, in the first Hong Kong cohort, we backed a number of companies that are building physical products, or at least there's a physical product in the, in the product itself. And I think, as we've announced publicly, we've got this partnership with Hacks, who, the world's leading hardware accelerator, who are very, very close by in Shenzhen. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about, like, what are the things that we're seeing, particularly in that space? Like, is hardware a big part of the future of EF in Hong Kong, do you think?
I think so. I think especially, we funded almost half of our companies in Hong Kong. Half of them are hardware. Obviously, being close to Shenzhen is a big plus, just because in terms of prototyping and production, the speed of that is just 10x of other places, right? If I could talk a bit about Neptune Robotics, which is our underwater robotics company that's serving the shipping industry. It kind of is it perfectly illustrates how Hong Kong can be relevant, because Hong Kong is obviously a very important port with lots of ships, obviously, coming across every day. And these are ships that are clearly not utilizing the latest tech revolution to do. It's a pretty outdated industry, right? So what Neptune's trying to do is to clean and inspect the bottoms of these ships to reduce fuel drag using underwater robots. And they actually are using the hack space in Shenzhen right now to actually build and iterate on these robots so that they can not only do inspecting, but also cleaning, and eventually using all the data that the cameras collect to do route optimization for all the ships coming in and out of the ports in Hong Kong and elsewhere.
Maybe, the other theme that we saw a lot in Hong Kong was sort of the ability to sort of really think about China as a huge opportunity, which, to be honest, is something that's very tough for our companies in London to do. But I know a number of the companies in Hong Kong saw China as either their primary market or their obvious scaling market. Can you talk a little bit about that? Is that quite common for Hong Kong startups? How's that changing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think obviously being right next to China, it's almost expected of somebody from Hong Kong to look at China as a market. Hong Kong itself is way too small to be the end goal as a market. So China becomes a kind of natural extension. So, for example, we have Kalis Technologies, which is basically actually two folks who are Hong Kong citizens, but they actually used to work out of Shenzhen. And what they're using is they're building disruptive data converter chip solutions that are targeting the future of the 5G and IoT markets. So I think this is really interesting. Their ultimate end market will be China. They will be selling to kind of manufacturers in China. They already have paid trials with companies like ZTE, which is super exciting. Right. And they are also kind of operating out of Shenzhen and Hong Kong at the same time. But that's definitely a company that we see that is jumping straight into the China market with a China-ready solution. We also have AIMS, which is a youth sports kind of performance wearable device that is also targeting the primary schools and high schools of China to help them measure students' sports performance a lot more accurately and effectively. So they also are jumping straight into the China market as well with their device.
Yeah, I think that's super exciting. I think actually this theme of starting life as a startup in a small market can actually be a real competitive advantage. It's one of the things that often when people talk about Israel and why Israel has been so successful as a startup nation is actually the market is too small in Israel to make a domestic company. So if you're ambitious, you have to think global from day one. And actually, I think in a way that can be a real benefit. Sometimes I do worry a little bit in Europe that, if you're in France or Germany or the UK, actually the markets are quite small, but they feel just big enough that you think you can maybe make a success by staying domestic. Whereas, I do think for Hong Kong, the fact that you have China on the doorstep and great access into Shenzhen and other places, I think that's just going to be a huge a huge advantage, and I'm really excited to see how that develops. It's also, I think, a great way to tap into other funding sources, because I think we increasingly see, and this is a big theme at Entrepreneur First, we increasingly see the funding landscape globalize. When we started Entrepreneur First back in 2011, every company that got funded in London was funded by someone who was like within a few miles of a VF's office. Whereas now it's pretty common for us to see US investors, even Chinese investors, Indonesian investors investing in our companies around the world. How do you see that playing out? Obviously, it's still early days for Entrepreneur First in Hong Kong, but do you think the companies that we fund in Hong Kong will raise their seed rounds in Hong Kong? Are there other options? Like, what is that starting to look like?
I think what might start looking like is maybe money coming in from either obviously local investors, but even mainland China.
Right.
The government actually just earlier this week revealed the plan for the Greater Bay Area. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but it's essentially a scheme to link the cities of Hong Kong, Macau, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, Zhuhai, the whole Pearl River Delta, basically into an integrated economic and business hub, which is a huge plan. I mean, it's Hong Kong is not just going to be Hong Kong in the future. It's going to be a mega city cluster along with Shenzhen, Guangdong, and Macau. So what this means is there's going to be a lot more talent mobility, a lot more kind of fund transfer mobility as well in terms of access to funds and capital. So Chinese startups have access to Hong Kong capital and vice versa. So I think looking at this, being a little bit more integrated into the mainland, definitely we'll see capital coming in from the mainland as well into Hong Kong startups.
I suppose the other topic I wanted to touch on was back to sort of thinking about talent, but in this kind of context that we've been talking about of Hong Kong as an international hub. Can you say a little bit about where is the talent coming from for the Hong Kong cohorts? Is it all local? Are the people from other countries? What are we seeing there?
Yeah, sure. So it's actually a pretty diverse group of talent. If you look at, so mainly we look for deeply technical talent, and a lot of them come from, for example, universities. So the top three unis in Hong Kong would be, for example, Hong Kong UST, CUHK, and HKU. And a lot of the, for example, PhD students are actually not all from Hong Kong. They could be from the mainland, they could be from India, they could be from the UK, even from the US. So we're seeing a pretty diverse mix of people in our cohort. So for example, I think a little less than 40% of our first cohort are actually Hong Kong nationals.
Right, wow.
The rest are actually from just around the region, or even as far as, the UK or the US or France even.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's, this is a theme that we've seen around the world, and I think kind of really speaks to why we're so excited about talent investing as a concept, which is, the cities we've chosen to be in globally they're very different from each other in lots of ways, but one thing they have in common is they're all natural talent aggregators. And, actually for a very long time, for 100 years, Hong Kong has been a sort of magnet for ambitious talent, people kind of going there to kind of make a career. And I'd say the same in very different ways. It's true of London, it's true of Paris, it's true of Singapore, and also Berlin and Bangalore. And so this idea of aggregating talent in one place from kind of all over the world, as well as making use of like local strengths, local universities, local economies, to me this is the essence of talent investing, because what we do is more than just say, oh, you're smart, here's some money, build a startup. It's really about embedding people in a community and making connections happen that enable companies that are more than the sum of their parts. So, I think Hong Kong really embodies that in a lot of ways, and I think that's super exciting. I think the one thing that we've definitely found in every place that we've started is, even though now, EF's relatively well established, and I think we have a strong brand globally, and, it's been great to have people like Reid Hoffman and Greylock involved in EF. When we first start in a place, people are still a little bit suspicious, or maybe not suspicious, just a bit confused, sort of, you do what and how? How do you feel like the ecosystem has responded to Entrepreneur First? Do you think people are receptive in the broader startup and tech ecosystem in Hong Kong to what we're doing, and is that changing?
Yeah, to be honest, I think in the beginning when we're telling people that we are almost like a pre-incubator, pre-accelerator program where we put 50 strangers in a room, And then 3 months later, somehow we get these amazing companies. They are a little skeptical. They're kind of like, especially in an Asian culture where people, it takes a little bit more time to build relationships, to figure out if that person is right for you, if the co-founder is right for you. I think it took a little bit more of people coming out of their comfort zone to really put themselves out there in the first 6 weeks of team building, for example, to really meet as many people as they could and, break up with the wrong people, form teams with the right ones. But I think every single person who's come out of EF, whether or not they built a company or not, has said that it's been such a transformative experience for them. Even those 6 to 8 weeks of team building has really just made them realize better who they were and what type of person they would work better with. So I think EF might, from the beginning, seem like a bit of a wacky idea. But I think everyone who's been through our program realizes how much of a personal transformation they went through at EF.
I think that's such an important point. And, to be honest, I don't think we talk about it enough, but, EF, one of my favorite things that anyone's ever written about EF is a guy called Angus Bailey, who is in one of our London cohorts last year. He wrote this great article, which he published without us knowing it originally, called Life Acceleration. And the point he makes about EF is whether or not you build a successful company at EF, the experience of doing EF forms, so the first sort of team building part of EF, changes how you think about not just startups and building companies, but also who you are, your strengths, like what you want. And I love that idea of life acceleration. It's we always try and avoid the term accelerator to describe what we do, because obviously it's so different from that. But I do like the idea of a life accelerator, and I actually think that in emerging ecosystems like Hong Kong and like London, the idea that you can go in, do something super intense like EF, and then not build a company, but that still be a net positive for your career. That's such an important idea. And
exactly.
What's interesting is in Silicon Valley, that's obvious. In Silicon Valley, the idea that starting a company and it not working out is can be a positive thing for you in your career. That's kind of a no-brainer. But what I'm really loving about seeing EF's growth is that actually that idea is spreading too, and it's great to hear that's happening in Hong Kong as well.
Yes, absolutely. So I feel like people who've been through the program, even if they don't have a company or don't have a co-founder, they've come out feeling that they've gotten so much personal growth. And as you said, life acceleration, just from being in the program.
Okay, well, I think we're basically out of time, but I just wanted to say, thank you for like we always say, every entrepreneur that joins an EF cohort has taken a leap of faith on EF, and we're always grateful. But you took a meta leap of faith of actually making Entrepreneur First work in a new location. So, and it really is working in Hong Kong. So I'm just excited to see it grow, and thanks so much for that. I look forward to being out in Hong Kong again very soon.
Same here. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Lavina.
If you're interested in finding a world-class co-founder to build a game-changing company, then apply now to one of our next cohorts by going to the homepage of our site, joinef.com, and clicking on the Apply Now button. You can access all of the show notes from today's episode on the media section of our site, joinef.com, and for the full unedited version of our conversation, head over to the EF YouTube channel. Thanks again for tuning in to Scaling Ambition, and catch you next time.